good afternoon. So let me see if I can figure out the clicker here. Green button, good. So I'm going to talk about the, social search and content. And so often, I think in our organizations, we think of these as maybe 3 different teams or 3 different areas. And so I'm going to talk to you about how I'm leveraging the 3 of them today and trying to bring them together and drive, an overall conversation and engagement with our prospects and customers. So, and hopefully I'll give you some ideas that you can bring back to your offices. So, first, my premise is that social today is the true, authentic face of a brand. You're more likely to have heard about a favorite brand from your friend or from a social media site these days than you are from a brand itself or from a media outlet. That's really my belief. And so as I look at the way marketing organizations are organized and spending their dollars and spending their time, I really think we need to kind of rethink the role that social plays and the importance of it, and not only driving engagement and driving leads and revenue, but in really, becoming the face of our brand. Each brand impression with an employee or a customer or a prospect, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or a blog or a comment on a website, is so critical. And that has, I think, some real implications for how we market today. So let me ask you to just take a step back for a second. Let me use an analogy of an apple. So an apple is, I think you'll agree with me, it's consistent, right? It doesn't change, and it's solid. All right? And now I want to contrast that to a bag of marbles. And a bag of marbles is, in some ways, the opposite, right? It's fluid. It's eclectic. It changes. So now let me ask you this. If you take a bag of marbles or an apple, which has more surface area? And for those of you who are mathematicians, I'm going to give you a little help here. Well, it turns out that the bag of marbles has 300% more surface area. So what does that mean? What does that mean for your marketing, for your social media, for the outreach of your brand? It means that with social media, I would say that today, because the brand impression is no longer a one-way out push, it's no longer a single story, it's a story made up of 1,000 parts. It's a story made up of the stories of your customers, the stories of your employees, the impressions of your brand when they deliver your product, right? So, you really need to stop thinking, I think, about a brand being static and start thinking about it being made up of thousands and thousands of impressions. And then how do you take and influence those impressions? And so I'll give an example here. One of the things we do at IBM that I think works quite well is we've really encouraged all of our employees to get out there on social. So I'm no exception. I have a blog. I regularly blog. I'm out there on Twitter. I do lots of public speaking. And the thinking is that it's important really for each of us as an IBM executive or a staff person to really leverage our communities and to talk about some of the things that we're doing at IBM, or just to make a good impression. Not necessarily selling IBM, but just to make a good impression and really to share that impression. So we really celebrate IBMers getting social and have created programs to help people get out there and blogging and set your Twitter profile up and start tweeting, and because we have lots of experts, right? We have lots of experts in technology or digital analytics or research or scientists, and so. We've talked a lot about today about, there can be great information, but if it doesn't get out there, if you don't push it beyond the walls of your company, really what's the point? So this is a way that we really use social activation of our employees to get our message out about the IBM company and to kind of increase our brand equity by using social. We also do influencer programs as well, where we align with different influencers. That's a pet project of mine that I think is just so important, really meeting, doing outreach with people in the world who are aligned on your points of view or your story, whether it's partners, prospects, or just people. There are lots of people who are very socially active and have influential networks, and just tapping into them and trying to do some brand building together, I think, is a really important way to leverage social. and really give your organization that authentic reach. It's always better, right, to have someone talking about your brand authentically, as opposed to the traditional kind of advertising push. So if you'll give me that, social is all about discovery, I would say, search is about validation, right? And these two are so inextricably linked today. The social signals are increasingly critical in driving search rankings. And this may be obvious to some of you, but when this really hit me, I was shopping for a Halloween costume back last Halloween, and I was putting in, best Halloween costume, and up came not a brand site, which was what I expected, not a local store in my network, but Pinterest pages of people who had, done a really good job of Halloween costumes, and that was the #1 field in organic search, and I thought, wow, that's a really powerful shift that, personal pages, personal Facebook or Pinterest pages are coming up as #1 in organic search. And I think that has to do with the fact that people care about other people and they've started to sometimes tune out brands. And so this will matter in search. So here, I found this little example, and I just think it clarifies for me in my own mind. So, this girl wanted to know what to do in New York, and she got lots of suggestions from her friends. And this is all leaving social impressions, right? The Bronx Zoo is fantastic. Go see the Statue of Liberty, right? And her whole circle is reading these posts now and learning about these different opportunities. And then when you go to Google, more often than not, we're starting to see these personal experiences come up, right? And so your impression of these brands of the Bronx Zoo might be from this 14-year-old girl as opposed to, some of the owned properties. So that's important, and I think that's a really important factor to always consider and to try to see if we can drive more of those social impressions and those social signals to increase search rankings, to increase the number of people that are talking about our brand in positive ways, right? We know that it's so important, the comments on a website, right? The feedback, the customer feedback. Retailers deal with this all the time. They know that the #1 thing people care about is the comments on their page as opposed to the branded content. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, at IBM, how we're driving. We're trying to kind of drive systematic engagement. So, the thinking is, as a brand today, you need to drive a conversation, kind of a conversation about what value do you bring. So, for Red Bull, they might be talking about, extreme sports. For Colgate, they may be talking about dental hygiene. For IBM, we might be talking about, advances in technology. Nike might be talking about performance, right? But it's less about selling and more about providing that source of information, being the type of brand that people come to for information. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do that today. So I call it building a content factory. It's really trying to, in a systematic way, create relevant, findable, hopefully shareable experiences. So there are a couple steps to this. One, relevance. So, it used to be, and I would say even maybe 5 years ago, you could be on message. We talked a lot about, are we on message? Is that message, our brand message? And I think now it's a little bit more about, how are you tying that message into relevant conversations, into what's relevant today, this week, what's relevant in the world, what's relevant in your industry, what's relevant for your customers. And this is the hardest thing in the world. And there's a company that I went to see, an agency. They've made a living out of this. They just basically have formed a news agency on what's relevant. And you can go in and watch them. And every day at 1 o'clock, they have the news hour, and they talk about all the relevant trends. So the day I went to see them, they were talking about Bitcoins and the legalization of marijuana and some drug trafficking and the fact that they think they found the new planking. It's people standing upside down with their clothes upside right. I don't know if you've seen this thing, but, crazy stuff. But, and what they said is, what they do is they actually work with brands and say, okay, tag life is good. That might be a good life is good campaign. Tag Ben & Jerry's. They might want to, tweet into the marijuana legalization and on and on. But it's about giving those brands authentic moments where they can insert themselves into these conversations, right? Which is a much different thought as opposed to, just having your brand conversation, right, coming at people when that's not maybe what they're not interested in this week or today. And doesn't really tie into this kind of hyper-relevant cycle. So step one is know what is relevant. Then step two is target your customer. So what does your customer care about? What are their pain points? What are they interested in? So this is Sally, right? And she's a working mom. She's got 3 kids. She doesn't have enough time. She's interested in quick, easy help, cleaning products. But just kind of literally creating a profile for her and understanding what kind of social feeds does she read, what does she care about, kind of what makes her tick, what is she interested in. And today, with social analytics and web analytics, you really can build some pretty sophisticated profiles of your customers. I've seen Guilt Group do this, and they do a beautiful job of this. They take you, they profile you, and they say, Tami, she is a working mom. She doesn't have a lot of time on her hands. She's, interested in brands, but she doesn't want to spend too much money on, crazy brands, whatever the hell it is. And they literally give you this psychedemic profile, and everything they do is kind of based on that data, that information. So 1 is hyper-relevance, right? Know what relevant conversation is happening. 2, know who your customer is and what they care about, what they're going to be interested in. And then 3 is starting to build a conversation. So that conversation, would be maybe on the left-hand side would be quick hits, like quick social posts or memes that might generate interest or an impression. And then moving along, maybe some content previews or a chapter of a book or an ebook that they might be interested in. And then moving along, maybe a webcast or a long-form interview. And then once you kind of have that laid out and laid out in a grid, and I'll talk a little bit about the grid and then a little bit about just how we do it in a working environment, this is my grid that we use to drive this engagement. So we look at the types of content, right, across the bottom, and then we look at the properties that will share them on the engagement. We layer in our kind of influencers and our channels, our paid, earned, and owned, and then we really work on our engine rankings in terms of, making sure that we're driving a robust conversation, and then we measure. And we measure this actively. Once a week, we literally go back and we see, how did that Instagram, post do? How did our slide share do? Was it effective? Did it get shared? Did people care? And we come back and we learn more and more from that. This is one of my favorite charts. I'm not even sure it belongs in the pitch, but I have it on my wall because it's one of my favorite charts. And the reason I have it in here is because I'm always asking myself, am I the person on the bottom left who's constantly bragging about being a great lover, or am I proving it right over here on the right? And sometimes I feel like our advertising, we just can't get beyond, the pride in this advertising about sort of, pounding your chest and saying what a great brand you are. And my premise is that's just not so effective. And I love this chart because it really shows, from a personal, standpoint of human nature, how people react. I mean, how do you react to each one of these? And so my premise is that we need to keep pushing more and more and more of our marketing to drive earned and shared media. So with that in mind, right, thinking about relevance, understanding who you are, what they care about, how they like to consume content, and then building that grid, we basically build a grid once a week. And the grid basically says, I like to give a tactile example. This is something you could just take and, and use, right? So this was our grid for maybe 2 weeks ago. Valentine's Day was coming up. So someone got the idea, hey, wouldn't it be cool to send Valentine's Day cards, like little digital e-cards to our top customers and some of our influencers? And then we had some other things going on that week. It was Entrepreneur Week, and so we had some ideas of how we could push into that. The next week was the Oscars. There's some world events going on, Women's Day, and then some more technical, some more technical events happening on that, or announcements that we could, that we could add to our grid. And then we basically just say, okay, what's the piece of content going to be? Is it going to be a creative? Is it going to be content? We have some journalists on site that just write on these topics. And then what's the engagement going to be? What properties? How's it going to get shared? And we do that every week. And then, here's some examples. On the left, here's an example of our Valentine's Day card. We had one that said, I can't tell you in 140 characters or less how much I care about you. And, the people loved it, and they shared it on their Facebook pages. And, it just gave a nice impression about IBM, that it was kind of a warm, I think, engaging thing to do. This is Kari Anderson. She's one of our influencers. She speaks a lot about IBM and writes in Forbes and other, and other publications. And so for International Women's Day, we just did this little meme. We highlighted Kari and thanked her for everything she's done. Ben & Jerry's, this is one of my favorites. I just thought it was brilliant because it was just so on brand for them. This, we're hearing reports of Ben & Jerry's being sold out in Colorado. Does anyone know what's going on? I mean, just brilliant. And obviously got tons of tweets and shares. And then I like this one too by Fitbit at the Grammys, sort of saying, hope you got a cheap seat in the back because it'll be better for your Fitbit. You see lots of this kind of what I'll call hyper-relevant content. And from what I see, I think it really gets much more shared if you are really in the moment for these customers, versus trying to get them to listen to your conversation, right? You're inserting yourself into kind of the hot conversation and taking the chance to make a brand impression. So, this is my theory here that content marketing builds brand equity and that drives engagement. So my team, what we do is we meet on Fridays, and we're my content marketing team. We meet on Fridays, and we have a couple of journalists, a couple of people from social media, a couple of creatives in an agency, a graphics person and a creative person from the agency. And what we do is we meet and we literally call it the beat box. And we say, what's happening in the world? What's happening that's relevant? What trends are out there? Have you seen any interesting marketing tactics going on? We should think about, and we just have a brainstorming session. And then on Monday, we come in, and our editorial lead, she's a journalist, she comes in and she says, I think this should be our theme for the next 2 weeks, and these would be some of the headlines. And then our creative comes in, and our creative person will say, she was the one who come up with the Valentine's Day campaign, or some type of social campaign. Maybe it might tie into some sort of a mission effort, or some sort of an announcement that we're having. And then we just have our social media team who will do, this is what we're going to be tweeting about. This is the topics. These are some of the IBM conferences and events that are going on that we should cover. And then we build out the content calendar. And then on Friday, we meet and we look at how everything did. There's tools you can use to measure, like Sysomos and Dynamic Signal. There's different tools that you can kind of look. I think Sprinkler does some of this. And you just basically, look at how did we do? What was the engagement like? Are we moving the needle? Or is our conversation going like this? Or is our community and our engagement, are we building it? And then we start the next week. And what's been nice about it is I think we're becoming much better and smarter content marketers because of the discipline of, first of all, being more relevant ourselves. At least at a big company like IBM, the danger can be that you get stuck in your inbox and you're missing maybe some of the big trends or what's going on in the world. And so I think that's very important. And then I think it's also important to become a better content marketing these days. I mean, I notice with my own Twitter engagement, it's my greatest teacher, because as I tweet, I regularly watch day in and day out what gets retweeted, what gets people to follow me, what gets shared, what has followers dropped. And that's what I think is so important about social. It just gives you that immediate feedback on what's working, what's engaging people versus what's maybe turning people off or just a tree falling in the woods. So that's my talk on search, social, and content, and how we're pulling the three of those together to to drive a conversation for the IBM brand. Sure. Oh, not at all.
Well, thank you. That's very interesting what you're doing. You mentioned there's a danger in working with a big company like IBM of getting stuck in your inbox. How do you get everybody engaged and on the same track, first of all? And then in particular, Natalie Cordum this morning mentioned getting buy-in from upper management, getting buy-in from the decision makers and so on. How do you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, well, I'm always amazed when I meet people and they say, well, we're on a social media lockdown. We can't engage in social media without press and legal. And, my answer to that is always, if you don't trust your employees to engage in social media, who do you really trust, right? Because they're out there, they're on social media. Your brand is being talked about on social media. hopefully your employees are your best advocates. If they're not, that's a whole nother problem, right? But I think it goes to employee and customer experience today, that it's important for employees to have a great customer and employee experience, because you need to have your employees as advocates, because they've got these circles, ever widening of circles of people who are learning about potentially your brand from cocktail parties and Facebook and Twitter and conversations. And I think we maybe 20 years ago used to be able to get away with a fantastic advertising campaign, and maybe the truth didn't quite follow through about what a great company we were. But now I think this stuff is really, it's out there, and so trying to stop your employees from engaging in social, I think is probably a losing battle. What we do at IBM is we actually have we have an IBM values, and there are three values, and basically we do a social media guideline policy, and it's very open. It's just basically nothing. You shouldn't share any insider information, and you should align with the IBM values. You can Google them and create your own policy, because they were actually created from the employees. But for the most part, I find people, even if they are unleashed, sometimes people are afraid to engage in social media. They say, what if I say something that's going to get me fired? What if I say something that does damage to my career? And I would just encourage people to, who are kind of afraid to take that first step in becoming a social advocate and building your sort of, social eminence, as I call it, to just dip your toe in, start reading. What I say is find 4 or 5 mentors in social that you like. I originally started watching Jay Baer, Brian Solis, Brian Kramer, who's right here in the San Jose area, a few others, and I kind of watched their voice. Porter Gale. I watched their voice and I watched what they did. And in the beginning, I just sort of emulated them. Oh, I see. They're talking about marketing. It's content, but it's it's sort of their own personality. Okay, I can do that. And then sometimes in my own mind, I say, sometimes you could be, like we were just at South by Southwest, and you could get yourself in trouble, right? Because people, will be tweeting funny things or silly things. And I always think in my mind, if I were running the company, would it look bad? Because you do have to have some filters. You do have to make sure as an employee, you're an advocate for the brand. So you really have to make sure, first, that you're reflecting the values of your company. Second, that you're not doing anything that would reflect badly on the brand. Because even if it's not, a branded ID, as an employee, you're an advocate for the brand. So that's not to say you have to be selling the brand, but I think you have to, act professional. And I would say, I say to my team, it's part of your job. I say, they laugh at me because I say, you have my explicit permission not to answer your email. I would prefer you were out on Twitter and Facebook and, becoming social and sharing content that we've created, as opposed to sending, thousands of internal emails of, nebulous value.
Sounds like excellent advice. Tami, thank you very much.
Thanks.